I'm back, everyone. And I hope that I'm recording in the right way now. So I'm going to find this over on my Facebook group, share it into my other group so that everyone can see it there. And let's just refresh the page. So hang on one sec, bear with me. These fun tech issues. So I hope a few of you are still with me. I think it should be running in the right direction now. I hope so anyway. So let's see if I can find this. Okay, there we are. And I'm going to share this. And why can't I share this? All right, share. We can find this group. All right, posting this over in the group and we're gonna get going. Okay, it's running live. So awesome, everyone. So great to be here. I think I might have lost a couple of you in my switching over there, but we're filming in the right direction now, which is important. I think a few of you are coming back, so that's great. So really excited for my first live here, even though tech issues is not so great starting out. Hey, Sylvia. So I want to talk today about the scope of practice of health coaches. I know in my Facebook group, this has been a big topic of conversation. I'm hearing a lot of people just really unclear about what the scope of practice is for health coaches. And it's a really fundamental piece. We really do need to get clear on this and really embrace that coach approach before we can have the confidence to even put ourselves out there in the world as coaches. So I had a lot of questions come in the Facebook group, and so I'm going to address those, and I'm going to talk about a few things to just really help clarify this scope of practice piece. So I hope you have a pen and a paper. I have lots to share. Hoping to get through all of this fairly quickly. I'll probably do some follow-ups and break some of these pieces down into shorter videos over time. But if you are confused about scope of practice, you're in the right place, and I hope today is going to clarify some of that, because when I look back on my own coaching practice, I know how I felt when I graduated from IIN. I thankfully got a bunch of clients actually through my course. About halfway through, I started working with clients. And for those first couple of years, and I was working with anyone who would hire me. I really just wanted the experience. And so I was working with all these different people. They had all kinds of different health conditions. And because I really wasn't sure of what to do, and I wanted to be of value, and I wanted to provide just anything that I could to help these people, I kind of defaulted into this mode of researching every health condition that they had and coming up with some sort of plan for them. What should they eat? What holistic things should they do? So I kind of came up with this holistic health and wellness plan for them and kind of gave it to them and hoped that they would go away and implement it. But of course, what I found was, number one, I was burning out and just working really hard, doing all the work for the client. So trying to figure it all out and be the expert and give them this information. And the other thing was that they weren't actually getting great results. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we get into it today, about why they weren't getting results. And so it was really frustrating those first couple of years. I felt like a failure. I felt like I really didn't know what I was doing. And so it really, inspired me and motivated me to go back and do more training, to figure out how can I help these clients with behavior change and really understand the coaching mindset. So I did additional health and wellness coach trainings. I did different certifications, all of that to really get clear. And so I'm bringing all of that to you today to help really clarify some of this. The other thing is that I've been coaching at IIN for the last 5 or 6 years now. I've coached thousands of students who are going through the health coach training program there. And one of the number one things that I hear from students who are about to graduate is, this confusion about what to actually do as a coach, and really a lack of confidence in their skills. Most people, get into health coaching because they have been, sharing health and wellness information with their friends and family. They tell people what to do. People follow them. People have gone through their own health and wellness journeys and learned a lot. So there's a lot of information sharing. There's a lot of telling and suggesting. And as we get into our health coach training program, we realize that's not really what coaching is. And then we're really confused as to what are we supposed to do if that's not it. So I hope to clarify a little bit of that today. Hopefully, if you've gone through my mindset workbook or listened to some of the things that I've been talking to about mindset, that will also help you get into this frame of mind. So let's get into it. Like I said, I have a lot to cover. Hopefully you have a pen and paper there. The replay will be in the Facebook group, and I will send that out, and I'll put some other resources in the comments after. So the first thing I want to say is that I'm not a lawyer, and when we start talking about scope of practice, especially when it comes to the states and the different legislations and things there, we can get into a little bit of that legalese. So I'm not a lawyer. I've done a bunch of research to hopefully bring you the best information that I could, but I'm not a lawyer, so I will give you some other resources that will be helpful for you to follow up with to get really clear on all this after. But I also want to say that health coaching is a really unregulated industry. So, even though there are some strict guidelines in states and things like that, I don't really think there's a lot of enforcement going on. So I think from an ethical and an integrity perspective, it is important to know what the scope is for the training that you've done and where you live, and really try to honor that as much as you can. So like I said, there's a lot to cover here, so I'm just going to kind of get into it. I have, I think, 4 or 5 main topics that I want to get to, and then also answer the questions that I got in the Facebook group. So first, I want to talk a little bit about those local and state regulations. I want to talk a little bit about, if you have other credentials and trainings, how does that sort of fit into scope of practice? Also, of course, want to talk about what happens when we get out of scope of practice. What do we do when we find ourselves veering in that place? I'll talk a little bit about the difference between education and coaching and prescribing. There are a couple of questions around that, so I want to address that. So those are the main things that I'm going to cover. But first, before those topics, I really want to just go over the actual scope of practice from 2 institutions. So the first is from the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and I think a lot of people in this group probably watching have gone to IIN. I went to IIN. That was my first health and wellness coach training that I did. And so you may be familiar with this sheet that I've sort of scribbled all over. This is the scope of practice from IIN. And so I want to just quickly go through some of the elements here. If you've done a different training, you'll obviously be looking at whatever the scope of practice was that you got from that training program. So the first thing that it kind of says here at the top is that there's so much you can do as a health coach. So what I was just talking about a minute ago is saying that, a lot of people, when they get into health coaching and they realize they can't suggest, tell, give recommendations, meal plans, all of that kind of stuff, they think, well, if I can't do that, what do I do? Right? So we have this big question around, how do I provide value to my clients if I can't be doing all of that? Well, I'm here to tell you that there's so much that we can do. And when I finally got my head around this piece of what I can do as a coach and what are the things to focus on that really make a difference, it was just so freeing. And just there was a lot of just joy and fun that came back into coaching for me. So I just want to go through quickly some of the points here on this scope of practice from IIN, just to clarify some things. So they kind of have go for it and avoid. So the things that we should do, and that we can do as a coach, and the things that we should avoid doing, that we shouldn't do. So when it comes to medical conditions, we generally want to work with people who are generally fairly healthy. They may have minor health concerns, maybe things like headache, fatigue, sugar cravings, low energy, those kinds of things. We do not want to ever say that we diagnose or cure disease. And we typically don't want to be working with people with complex health issues. Things like cancer and kidney failure are included here on the scope of practice. What I do want to say is that yes, as a coach, we can work with people who have complex medical conditions as long as they are working with a healthcare team. So if we become part of that healthcare team, we absolutely can work with them. So they've got a primary care physician, maybe they're working with a therapist, another specialized practitioner or professional. As long as they're working with those people who are sort of diagnosing, prescribing, giving them various lifestyle prescriptions perhaps, we can help that client implement those things, set some goals, some action steps, give them some accountability to get those things done. So that's where we can help in those kinds of situations. Age is included here. We generally want to be working with adults. If we're working with minors, we always want to get written authorization from the parent. I know a lot of students feel like they want to work with kids, and really start early, educating them about health and well-being. We always want to go through the parents first. We can't obviously just work one-on-one with a child. If you're doing things like groups and you're working in schools and things like that, that's okay. From a medical perspective, we really always want to be referring back to their primary care physician if they've got medical issues. So especially when it comes to medications, so we want the client to ask their doctor about alternatives to medications and referring back to them with any major changes. If they're looking for a second opinion, encourage that as well. But we do not suggest that clients stop or change prescription medications or stop seeing their doctor, of course. From a dietary perspective, one of the main theories that we learn in IIN is that we want to crowd out the bad to fit in the good. So that's where we would be suggesting that they crowd out things like caffeine, sugar, alcohol, tobacco, junk food, and dairy. But we don't want to be excluding major food groups or doing extreme detox programs. So my cat has just jumped up here, so you're gonna have to go, buddy. So fun with live video. So right, not excluding major food groups or detox programs. So it's that crowding out and fitting in. So that's what we want to do there. When it comes to supplements, sorry, I'm just rearranging things here to make room for my kitty. We can, if we want to, recommend things like superfoods. So those are just real whole foods that we know that are really nutrient dense. So, those would be things like fermented foods, avocados, berries, nuts and seeds, kale, fish, things like that. So those are superfoods that we could recommend. A multivitamin that is just generally good for everyone would be fine to recommend. And maybe some mineral supplements, so things like calcium, magnesium, things that people are typically deficient in. So things that people can get just off their drugstore shelf, they don't need a prescription, things like that. It's okay to stay sort of in that area when it comes to supplements, but we don't want to be recommending things like any controversial things, high doses of things. If you're not trained in a supplement, you don't want to be prescribing it. When it comes to exercise, of course, if we're working with generally healthy people and they're already exercising, continuing to do what they're doing or what works for them, really thinking about gentle, low risk things, making changes like as walking, for example, like walking if they're not really doing anything at this point. We don't really want to encourage vigorous things without consulting their physician first. Maybe they're working with a fitness trainer. You could recommend those kinds of things as well. Then in the scope of practice here, we get into a few other areas that are found on the circle of life, the wheel of life, things like relationship, career, and spirituality. And so it's kind of a similar scope of practice for each of those things. We're not relationship experts. There goes my kitty. We're not marriage counselors. We're not spiritual practitioners. We're not career consultants. So we just want to make sure that we're not really telling our client to leave a marriage, quit a job, change, religious affiliations. We're encouraging things like around relationship, that they're really working on the relationships, that they're, having good bonds and, developing social relationships, promoting participation in social events and things like that, talking about their important relationships that they need to. exploring new career options if that's an issue for them. Spirituality, maybe they just want to explore, so we can help them experiment with these things, maybe help them figure out a decision-making process. But again, we're not consulting, telling people what to do, or making any decisions for our clients around these topics. And then the final piece on the liability here, on the scope of practice from IIN is liability. So you do want to be getting liability insurance and contacting IIN if any issues arise. Also too, and this is a whole other topic for another video that I will be doing, you do want to be using an agreement with your client as you start your coaching engagement. So that's really, really important to set all of this up. So within that liability piece, you do not want to be calling yourself a registered dietitian or a nutritionist. So those are important things to distinguish. What I'll say too, and this is just a couple of additional pieces about this IIN scope of practice before we move on. You are not certified when you graduate from IIN. So we're not licensed certified. The title that you have when you graduate from IIN is Integrative Nutrition Health Coach. If you want to become certified, then you actually have to sit for a certifying exam through an additional outside body. So there's a couple of different organizations that do certifying. There's the IAHC, so that's the International Association of Health Coaches. So I have completed that exam. I sat for that exam, so I now can call myself a certified international health coach. I've also gone through the process of becoming accredited through the International Coach Federation, sat for an exam there. So I have my ACC, which is an accreditation that I received from that organization. And as well, I'm just preparing to sit for the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches exam. So that's the new organization that's coming out in the last probably 5, 6, 7 years maybe. And they are really an independent body that is setting the standard for health and wellness coaching in our field. So if you're not familiar with that organization, and I'm going to talk about them just in a minute here, but that's important. But I just wanted to make that clarification. So when you graduate from IIN, you are not certified. So you're a integrative nutrition health coach, and that's your title there. So that covers scope of practice from IIN. Now what I want to do is touch on the scope of practice from the organization that I just mentioned, the National Board for Health and Wellness Coaching. So they have a scope of practice here that I will attach below. And like I said, these are the folks that are really setting the standard for our industry. And they're an independent body. They're not connected to any training program or school. So they're really legit. And so I think they're really developing these fundamental standards. So I want to just highlight a couple of things that they share in the scope of practice. I won't read it all through because that would be pretty boring to listen to me read it. But some of the things highlighted here is that, we work with individuals and groups in a client-centered process. We facilitate and empower the client to achieve self-determined goals. We help the client mobilize their internal strengths and their external resources to develop self-management strategies for making sustainable, healthy lifestyle behavior changes. And so an important part, and I am going to read this part out because it does really mention the scope of practice. So it says, while health and wellness coaches per se do not diagnose conditions, prescribe treatments, or provide psychological therapeutic interventions, they may provide expert guidance in areas which they hold active and nationally recognized credentials and may offer resources from nationally recognized authorities. So that's an important one in there. Unless we're trained by another organization, we cannot provide that expertise. So a few other words here that are important. We're partners and facilitators. We support our clients in achieving health goals and behavioral changes based on the client's own goals. We can also work in alignment and consistent with treatment plans that are prescribed to clients by other health professionals. So that part is actually in there. We can work with those people as long as there's a treatment plan that's already been provided. And then the last line I think is important. Coaches assist clients to use their insight, personal strengths and resources, goal setting, action steps, and accountability toward healthy lifestyle change. So those are the areas that we can absolutely, with it full integrity and within our scope of practice, do. So I think the bottom line here from the NBHWC is that we really cannot advise around what to eat or what not to eat. So unless you have another credential, like you're an RD or a nutritionist, you really can't be providing that kind of information. So with permission, there is an opportunity though within this to provide other resources that are really general in nature, things like books, online sources, things like that, that are general public health organizations, things like the CDC, the NIH. We really want to keep it general when we're getting into that field of expertise. So what I really want to say here is that after we go through both of these scopes of practices, it really does come down to that coaching mindset. So we really do have to, if we want to be coaching and staying within scope, letting go of that, being the expert, being the authority, being the teacher, and embracing the coach mindset, which is all about letting go of those things, recognizing and holding that the client is creative, resourceful, and whole. They have the answers inside of them. And we're using our coaching skills to help, develop a plan to help them reach their health and wellness goals. So it's the mindset piece that we have to shift first before we can really fully embrace our scopes of practice. So those are the two scopes of practice that I really wanted to get clear on first. And then now I want to talk a little bit about the state regulations. So I'm up in Canada, so the laws are a little bit different up here, but they are pretty specific in the US, and each state has its own legislation around health and wellness coaching. And there are some of them that are more specific, and it really all comes from registered dietitians and licensed nutritionists, sort of what they feel their scope of practice is, and then what they're allowing health coaches to do. So state laws, you really want to be clear on whatever your state law is about what a health coach can do and what we can't do. In many states, and again, I'll put a link to the overview of what the state legislation is in the link in the comments below. But there are certain states where only registered dietitians can do individualized meal plans and talk about nutrition. So it's important that you get clear on what those are in your state. Again, bottom line here, and a really great general rule of thumb, is that we want to keep it general. So we don't want to focus sort of in our marketing and specific things around the individual. So non-individualized is the best. So if you can be doing group cleanses, group coaching, workshops where you're providing general information about recipes and meal plan ideas, those can absolutely work. So we want to avoid using the word nutrition or meal plans. So other ideas, what we can say instead is, recipe ideas or meal ideas for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, snack ideas. So we can providing ideas and suggestions, and that's a great way to avoid that specific word around meal plan. So hopefully that gets that one clarified. If you have other credentials, licenses, trainings that you've done, absolutely coaching can work as a really wonderful complement to some of those things and other credentials. How it works, specifically under the National Board for Health and Wellness Coaches, is that any of your existing trainings or higher levels of training always take precedence. So especially when it comes to disciplinary actions or professional conduct, it's always going to be your most highest level of credential that takes precedent. So if you're an MD and a health coach, obviously the MD is going to take precedence over your health coaching. Same if you're an RD or a nurse, those other trainings are going to take precedence. So again, a rule of thumb to always keep in mind, if you didn't receive training in a specific area or field, you are not an expert in it. So your role and your particular scope of practice is always going to be determined by the training that you did and the training education, the training institution that you went to. So always check back there first for your specific scope of practice. So around this piece around, well, you might have great knowledge in something and done a lot of studying, but if you're not trained, then, you really can't practice there. So you may be somebody who's really educated in psychology. Maybe you're really competent in its principles and practices. But unless you're formally trained to do psychology, then you can't practice psychology as a health coach. You just can't do it. It's just not within our scope. So I know there are many of you out there who do kind of have multiple trainings, multiple backgrounds, and credentials. So yes, you can wear multiple hats, as a health coach. Maybe you studied functional medicine. So you can bring those two things together. They can complement one another, but you always want to be clear with the client which hat you're wearing. So if they sign up for you as a health coach, as you get into your sessions, maybe there's a question that comes up or something that you think, oh, from my functional medicine background, I really want to share this with the client. So you can say something like, I'm going to actually put on my functional medicine hat right now. Is that okay with you if I do that and share some information from that perspective? So always asking for permission, being clear on what hat you're wearing, and now I'm going to come back to my coaching hat, so we'll talk more about that. So if you're flipping back and forth, always make sure that you're asking for permission and you're being clear on which role you're actually functioning in at the time. So that can work. You can wear multiple hats, just be really clear. So important now to talk a little bit about what's in scope and what's out of scope. So when you start to feel like maybe something is verging out of scope, that it doesn't feel quite comfortable for you, the number one thing that you have to remember here is that if it's not in scope, you're going to refer out. So it is important for health coaches, I think, to have sort of a roster of people you can refer to, other holistic health and wellness practitioners maybe in your area, or that other coaches and people that you might know of online that have great reputations, or people that you've worked with. Important to have those referral sources sort of in your Rolodex of people to refer to. Pardon me. So there's kind of two areas of referrals that kind of fall into again, the National Board for Health and Wellness Coach Service Specifications. One is perhaps the coaching engagement has come to an end, so you're wrapping up, you're finishing up with your client, and in the last few sessions, some things have come up and you realize that they might need some other professional support going forward. So you could talk to the client about, making some referrals for moving forward. Maybe it's come up that they aren't happy in their marriage and they're looking for a marriage counselor. So, they might need that kind of support. Maybe the next thing for them is to really get their exercise plan going. So they want to hire a fitness trainer. So that would be someone you'd want to refer out to. Maybe, as they've dug into things, emotional stuff has come up, maybe past traumas. So you really feel like this person really could use a therapist, a mental health practitioner. So, that would be kind of the next step for them. So referral source kind of number one is when your coaching engagement comes to an end and the client's moving on, who else might they need to work with? And then we also have the referral situation where they're still working with you, so you're continuing your coaching engagement, but it's come up that they do need some other sources of support at the same time. So that could be therapy, it could be an addictions counselor perhaps, a diabetes educator, maybe they actually do need to go get some more knowledge that you can't provide, a lawyer, a nutritionist, a personal trainer, a naturopath, for example. So lots of other professionals that you might want to refer to while you're continuing to work with your clients so that they can get that expertise because you really feel like it's out of scope for you. So that's kind of how we deal with that out of scope piece. So I want to talk now a little bit about the difference between educating, prescribing, and coaching. Touched on this a little bit when I talked about the mindset of a coach, which again really is the foundation. We need to embrace that mindset of a coach. We need to be the ally, the guide on the side, that support system, facilitator, who's empowering our clients. But there are a lot of people who come from health educator type backgrounds, people with a lot of knowledge that they want to share. So that educator piece is really all about educating, teaching, knowledge, facts. So you're giving a lot of information to the client. And actually what we've found from research is that education alone does not work all that well for behavioral change. So if you're someone who's been trying to be the expert, you're just giving your client all of this information and knowledge, and they're not making change, it could be why. So the studies show that that educator role only is effective in about 30% of results for behavioral change. Whereas coaching, behavioral change coaching, actually can account for 95% change, or the results. We get 95% better results when we're doing the behavioral change piece. So according to the National Board for Health and Wellness Coaches, in any given session, we can educate 25% of the time. So we could allocate 25% of that, say, hour-long session to education. But again, we really want to go back to, am I overwhelming the client with information, or am I using those coaching skills to really help them assess, are they ready to change? Where are they on that stages of change continuum? Do they have all the supports they need to make the change? Do they have all the information? Have they set themselves up for success? Do they have a vision? What's their goal? What's the action plan? What's the accountability? How are they going to track along the way? So there's a lot of other stuff that we can do in there. And education is, a little part of it. So I really wanted to touch on that. Prescribing is, of course, what a doctor would do, maybe a naturopath, prescribing treatment based on a diagnosis or lab work, prescribing medications, maybe an RD prescribes a specific therapeutic meal plan, maybe there's specific exercises that are prescribed, so it's a prescription, it's a protocol. We don't do that as health coaches. Again, we can help the client implement some of those if they are recommended by other health professionals, but we're not coming up with those prescriptions. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as I get into the questions that have come through on the Facebook group, because a couple of the questions did apply to this. So want to get into the questions. I hope that kind of set a good sort of foundation for you. But I'll get into some of the questions that came up and get into some more of these details. So in the Facebook group, Martina asked about sharing resources, templates, handouts, and when do we share those? What do we share? Again, I come back to your training program. So whatever resources you were given in the methodology, the program part of your training that you did. So, if you went to IIN, there are the 6-month program materials. So you can use any of those with your client. There's a ton of materials and resources there. They're a really great starting point. They're professionally developed. They look really great. They're definitely the basics, but a great place to start. And as you go along, of course, you're probably going to bring in and develop your own tools. But it really does depend on the training that you studied, what resources they have to have given you to share with your clients, and as well if there was a methodology or a program or other resources that were provided you. Usually in a training program, that's part of it. So absolutely you can share all of those. Jasmine had a few questions. First one was about disclaimers. So medical disclaimers, privacy, confidentiality disclaimers. Absolutely, you want to have a full disclosure and disclaimer on your website. Usually that's included in the footer of your website. It's usually, a number of pages. It's quite elaborate. And like I said, it's privacy, confidentiality, medical kinds of things are included in there. So you want to make sure that that's absolutely there on your website. And then when it comes to developing your own programs, whether it's a course or an ebook, or you're doing videos, Facebook groups and things like that, you want to have a mini disclaimer there that really says something like, you are not giving medical advice, and what you're sharing is not a substitute for the care and advice of a doctor. So be really clear in all of your materials that you have those mini disclaimers that this is not in replace of medical advice. Jasmine also asked about meal planning, and can we say that and do it? I think I've already addressed that. Basically, we can't do individualized meal plans. We can do general things, again, for groups. We don't want to be calling them meal plans. That could get you into trouble in various states, but calling them things like recipe, dinner ideas, snack ideas, things like that, we can absolutely use. Jasmine also asked about stating medical facts, so things like sugar is addicting, or different stats you want to use. So again, because you're not the expert, you didn't do the research, you didn't, come up with this, you didn't write the paper on it. So you always want to back up those medical facts and stats with the original source. So where did you find it? And you just link it back to it, you source it, you give it that attribution, and then you should be fine. Types of content to share, Jasmine also asked about, and I think, kind of touched on this. It's that general health and wellness content. It's the content that you got from the program, the training that you did for people who are generally healthy and well. Sophia asked about medical tests. You always want to refer the person to a medical practitioner. So if you have other training and you are able to conduct tests or analyze tests, you can do that. But if your only training is a health coach training, you are not qualified to request tests or analyze them. So refer them to a naturopath, their doctor, a functional medicine practitioner. If you feel some tests need to be done, they'd get the results back from that practitioner. The practitioner would explain the results, probably give some sort of diagnosis or protocol or medications. And again, you could help the client implement those and help them really develop that self-efficacy and stay in line with whatever that practitioner thinks they should do as a result of those tests. But unless you have other training, you're not qualified to request tests or analyze them. Barbara asked this point about educating versus prescribing, and I did touch on this already. I do want to talk a little bit more about it because I think it is a really important point that a lot of people get confused on. So, we know there are other people out there like health educators, diabetes educators, and again, it's all about the knowledge. They're sharing knowledge. They're not really doing that behavioral change piece. And so, again, we get back to the fact that actually coaching, through the coaching approach and the coach mindset is actually much more effective at behavioral change than just teaching and sharing information. I think I touched on this already too, about prescribing. So that comes from a doctor, a naturopath, a functional medicine doctor. They're diagnosing and prescribing some sort of treatment protocol, not what we do as health coaches. And educating, I think I've touched on that. We can do 25% in our coaching. So we would educate on things like, the benefits of greens, the benefits of sleep, exercise. We'd share some tips, some benefits, things like that. So some general education that people can find generally, I think would be fine to share. So I do have a tip for you when it comes to this, educational approach. How do we educate? How do we teach versus coaching? And so always we want to show up as the coach first. In all instances, if you're putting yourself out there in the world as a coach, we want to show up as a coach first. It's also much more empowering if we allow the client to do their own research. So, if a client is asking you about some information, to share knowledge, facts, things like that, how we can approach that, how we can deal with it is just, say to the client, well, what do you already know about this topic? So gauge and understand their level of knowledge that they currently have. And then you can ask, well, what more do you need to know about it? What else do you want to know? So what's the new piece that they want to know about it? And then how would you like to go about figuring that out? So again, we're really coach-like. We're here, what do you already know? What more do you want to know? And how are you going to go about figuring that out and learning that? So that's really the way to approach, that part of it sort of in the first instance. If the client's totally stuck, if you have something and you really do want to share it, really asking for permission, do I have your permission to actually share some information with you? We really want to give them sort of a piece of information at a time. We don't want to overwhelm them with all kinds of knowledge, bombard them with facts and stats and information. And once the client has had an opportunity to go through it or do some research, ask them, does that make sense to you? What did you learn about yourself, or what new pieces of information did you learn? And how will you use it? How will you actually start to integrate this new information into your life? So that's a great coach approach to dealing with teaching, educating. Barbara also asked and mentioned she's trained in functional medicine, and so she's wondering about, how do you do both of those things? And we already talked about wearing different hats. You can wear a few different hats. Really want to make sure that you're telling the client which hat you're wearing, asking for permission to switch hats. And again, just really knowing that being the expert and sharing a bunch of knowledge is actually not as effective as the coaching piece. Sasha asked, do we offer tips, resources, handouts when asked from the client? And I think I just kind of go back to my last answer that we really want the client to do their own research first. We want to show up as the coach in the first instance. And again, educating 25% of the time if that feels right. So that's a lot of stuff that I just shared, a lot of information. I'll be putting some links and resources in the comments. I see Sylvia's asking, do we need a website? So that's a whole other marketing topic, which marketing is not my area of expertise. I do have some thoughts and comments on it. Not going to get into that into too much detail here today. I think there are many different camps, probably a couple of different camps. Yes, you absolutely need a website. Other people are saying, no, if you have other marketing tools, you might not need a website. My personal thought is that, if you are having an online business, an online entrepreneur showing up virtually, then I think it is important to have an online home. I don't think it has to be elaborate or expensive, but I do think if someone Googles who you are, it's important for them to see your online home. It really is our business card these days. So that's my 2 cents on that. I really hope this has been helpful today. I know we went through a lot. I hope you took some notes. You will be able to continue to watch this video in the Facebook group, and I will send a replay out by email early next week. I'll put some links in the comments so that you have some of these pieces that we talked about here today. I hope this has really helped to clarify a little bit around scope of practice. I'm really passionate about really helping you all figure this out so you can feel really good in your role as coach and really be clear on what I can do and what I can do. Because I know when I figured that out for me, things really started to open up. My practice started to open up. And again, I just started to feel that coaching became fun again. And I was really able to move through it and just really help clients in a deep and meaningful way with the behavioral change piece. So it started to feel really good. So I hope it's starting to become a little bit more clear to you. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.